Hello everyone, my name's Ruth Claxton. I'm artist maker here at Eastside Projects, and we're really pleased to have Natasha MacVoy and Jes Fernie here today in conversation to talk about or talk around the ideas and the kind of experiences that underpin You and I, which is Natasha's very beautiful show that's in our second gallery at the moment and until the 16th of December. And that music we were just playing is the kind of our version of the soundtrack to the film. So hopefully that's got you in a kind of You and I state of mind. So if people need closed captions, they should be enabled. So you should just be able to switch them on. Natasha and Jes are gonna have a conversation. If questions come up as you go through, then just put them in the chat, and then we'll be able to come to questions at the end. But are really keen to, get questions and for this to be kind of interactive. I'm going to hand over to Natasha and Jes and say thanks very much for being here, and really looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. That's great. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am a big Eastside Projects fan, having followed the work of Gavin and Ruth for 20 years or something, a bit disturbing. I just think you do amazing work with artists in the city of Birmingham, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation to you and from Natasha. So as Ruth said, this is going to be a kind of conversation between Natasha and I. We're going to talk about how we started working together, her exhibition at Eastside Projects, and also the text that I've written in response to her exhibition. We made the decision not to show any images, but obviously if you want to see a little bit of what we're talking about, just go to the Eastside Projects website. I think Ruth's putting links in the chat. And as Ruth said, just put any comments or questions in the chat so that we can come to them at the end of our talk. So I have had the real pleasure of working with Natasha over the last 6 months, discussing the development of her exhibition and ideas for the text that I've written for the show. But also we've been kind of doing lots of book recommendations and podcast recommendations. So it's been like this really lovely, very quite intense process, which I think the text is just one part of that, really. And I think what struck me about Natasha's original invitation for me to work with her was a kind of openness and interest in entertaining the idea that I wouldn't necessarily write a kind of straightforward exhibition text. And it's something that I've just become really interested in over the last, I think I can pinpoint it. It was 4 years when Alice Channer invited me to write a text about in response to her exhibition, and I wrote a kind of experimental text where I assume a kind of amphibian guise that crawls through the gallery. And I got a sort of taste for kind of looking at exhibition making and writing in a slightly different way. Trying to move beyond a situation where, as a curator, I comment sort of one step removed from the work towards a point where I become somehow implicated in the process and develop a more kind of experimental approach that puts both of us, the artist and myself, on a more kind of equal footing. So we have a sort of more collaborative, potentially vulnerable approach, which I really enjoy. Slightly terrifying, but it's really nice. And I recently curated an exhibition at the Milton Keynes Gallery that looked at contemporary sculpture. And Natasha came to see it, and I was super impressed that you came all the way from Gloucestershire. It's kind of 5-hour round journey. Mm-hmm. And we struck up a conversation, we had a cup of tea, and then you invited me to write this text. And Natasha, I just wanted you to say a bit about what spurred you on to contact me and come to that exhibition.
So I thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Ruth, for hosting, and Jes for this conversation. I had been following your work for a while, so I had also really loved the text you wrote for Alice Channer's work. I had bought another piece, a small publication you made with Rhys Corran, the walking piece. And with that, you had also sent, oh, nice, hello, cat. You'd also sent more about your own work. And so I really wanted to come and see Tricks the Figures. I wanted to see one of your shows in the flesh, and there were also a lot of artists in it whose work I wanted to see as well. So since moving to Gloucestershire, I've become a bit more purposeful on the exhibitions I go to visit, and I'd rather travel further and maybe only see one show, but hopefully get a lot from it. And then it was chance that we bumped into each other and there was time for a cup of tea. So that was really amazing. And so I knew that I really loved your approach to writing and to putting shows together. And then I think genuinely you'd put a thing out on Instagram saying that you welcomed approaches for writing. And I thought, well, I will do exactly that. And also I had, I had put some money together, put some money aside from some work I'd sold to be able to commission exactly that, to go alongside this new film that I was really excited to be making with Eastside, which was a real jump in my practice as well. So it seemed to come together.
It was perfect, wasn't it? It was a really good meeting point, I think. Yeah, that's wonderful. And equally, when I met you, I went off and did a little research about your work, and I became just really interested in your kind of forensic approach to art making and research, and also to language, which I think is a common thing that we have sort of an interest. And the ways that you intertwine the reality of your life with this making process to explore the subject of neurodiversity and mothering and love and identity. And I just want to take a moment to briefly describe the elements of your exhibition at Eastside Project, so we all have a sense of what we're talking about. I'm sure many of you in the room have seen the exhibition, but I thought it might be useful just to get to sort of mentally position ourselves within it. It's one small dark gallery space which measures about 5 meters. It's a square space. And there's a general feeling of calmness, but also strangeness in the room. And I think, Natasha, you described it as maybe you get this sense that you've arrived at a glade of a wood, a space where the trees have opened up. And you're invited to stop and look, but you're also kind of unsure about where the story's going and what these sounds allude to. And there are images and sculptures placed in the room. So there's a kind of sense of generosity, but also intrigue. And I think the sound really adds to that. It was great to hear it as everyone was coming into the room. And just to describe the elements very quickly, there are 2 films. One's a new film called You and I, which follows the back of 2 figures as they walk through the woods, and they wear similar clothing and they have similar hairstyles. And this film nearly fills the whole wall space. So it's really important that it's big, but also that it reaches the floor. So you get a sense when you walk in that you're walking with the people in the film. You kind of feel invited in as a viewer. And then the second film is an existing work called Mum Mum, which is shown on a monitor on a smaller screen next to the larger one, where Natasha has her head wrapped and cast for the making of a wig. And then these 2 films are first revealed by their reflection in a cluster of vinyl cutouts of Natasha's crossed legs that are attached to the wall. Next to those vinyls, there's a textured ceramic version of the seated shapes that glimmer and glisten in the subdued light. And then there's 2 hooded glass heads that kind of lurk in the corner, and they sort of watch you as you move through the space, and also the women in the film. They watch those too. And then finally, there's a kind of upturned jug, and the space is filled with music, which is occasionally joined by a woman's voice singing vowel sounds, which is what you heard when you came through. When I was thinking about doing this talk, I thought, oh my God, this is nuts. I can't just describe the exhibition. I have to show images. But what I really like is that we're using language to talk about the work in the exhibition. And that links really heavily to the context of the show and our conversation.
Yeah, because language is a really key factor in my day-to-day life with the children, like using precise language so that things, because things can get taken very literally or get taken out of context quite quickly. And that was another reason I wanted to like relinquish my interpretation over to you, this sort of sharing of who held the language and if the language told us anything. And I remember one of your early suggestions was that you might write it as one whole sentence without breaks. And then because we'd already talked about this going backwards and forwards of like, you might write something and then I might interpret it through how I speak it. And if it was one sentence, where would I break it up? So this idea around interpreting what's happening, either in language or imagery, I think is quite important in this space.
Absolutely. I remember that list. It was quite long. There was like 5 different potential approaches, and I got really excited about that one about just using one sentence. But I finally kind of ended up with a kind of a completely different approach. But yeah, that's just sort of way that the process unfolded, which is really lovely through dialogue, basically.
Yeah.
So there's a whole conversation going on in this exhibition and your work about invisible labour, about repetition, your voice, the way that you care for your neurodiverse teenage children, which we're going to get into. But first, I just want to ask, I remember when we first met, I asked you what's at the root of your practice, what are you kind of tussling with? And then when we spoke last week, you thought, I've been thinking about that and I still don't really know. And of course, the point is we never really arrive at the answer to that. But I'm just wondering if you've got any nearer and how this has led to the making of this exhibition.
So where I landed this morning, I was still thinking about it, is that I think my work's a lot about how we see and how we interpret what we see, but also verbal and non-verbal. I'm really interested in the fact that we all go through life thinking that we have a definitive version of events, but actually it's only our version of what's happened, and we're continually in relation to anybody else's version of what's happened, even if we've all witnessed the same thing. So in my work, I think I'm interested in playing with time and space and people's perceptions of that and of an event happening in time and space. So I'm often really led by the space that the work's going to be in. And like you said, that gallery too really did feel like a glade in the wood because the walls are so much taller than the floor space, and they sort of hug you almost. And so it reminded me of these walks. So all through lockdown, just after one of my children had left school and the other was still in school at that point, and to try and keep everybody well, we started doing a daily walk in the woods. But walking with my children was a bit like trying to go for a walk with a dog, where you're either a bit in front to encourage them along, or you're staying back so that you don't cut the walk short. So I've spent a lot of time following their backs through the woods, and they've also got to an age where they don't want to be documented. So I had taken a few quiet films, and now obviously, 4 years later, they've grown up. So those are a capsule of that time. And this film felt like making a capsule of me in this time that actually in years to come, they will come back to. And it's like I'm speaking to their past, and in the future, they will be speaking to my past.
That's
so
really
I don't think that answers the question still. I've just gone on another tangent.
It definitely did, definitely. And also it's reflected in our relationship in the way that I've assumed your voice and you've assumed, and I'm working with your kind of narrative, but then also the way that you plan to use my material in the future. So it's a kind of ongoing narrative. You're absolutely answering the question. It's kind of your kind of fundamental interests and how it is that you relate your work to the world. And I remember really vividly when we first spoke on Zoom in April this year, you spoke about your interest in stunt performers and the parallels that they held between the role of mothers or parents, the fact that you're invisible, or you have to be invisible, you're expert in managing crisis situations, but also the need to continually to perform without being injured or negatively impacted in some way. And what I'm going to do throughout this events is just do a few readings from my text, and I thought I would just read the section here about the stunt performer interest. If I Google stuntman, I summon Yakima Canute, an American rodeo rider, cowboy, and stand-in for many Hollywood actors. Excuse me. He died, excuse me, I'm just going to get some water here.
Yeah.
He died in 1986 at the age of 91, a long life for someone so willing to fling themselves into someone else's oblivion. He developed a complex array of techniques to protect himself and other stuntmen from injury, while performing the art of making artificially constructed violence, catastrophe, and death look real. The artist and writer Mary Walling Blackburn has suggested that viewers, in watching these films, indulge in the sorrow of others in order to deter the trauma of their own grief. There's something comforting about the fact that someone, in this case, Canute, is willing to pave the way, one step removed, to the insistence of our denial.
It's so nice hearing you read it.
Right? It was so strange. When I started reading it, I was thinking, I just know Natasha's voice reading this. I've written this in the first person, just so everyone gets a sense of this. Maybe you haven't read it, but I've written it in Natasha's voice, in a first person text. And Natasha's recorded that text, and that recording is available on the website. I think Ruth put the link in the chat. But what's so weird is that I only know that text through Natasha's voice. So this is the first time I read it aloud, and I'm like, this sounds really wrong. This is my voice reading Natasha. But anyway, it's quite strange. But I wanted you to talk about your interest in Yakima Canute and this idea of stunt performers and how it relates to the film and the exhibition.
Yeah, so I came to Yakima Canute by Google, but what I was immediately struck by was the fact that he not only was a stuntman himself, but he went on to direct stunt performance, so action sequences, and specifically developed loads of safety techniques to be able to protect humans and non-humans alike. So he was making replica harnesses for carriages so that they would break in a certain way so that horses wouldn't get injured, and he understood how to make the ground in the different layers of strata so that carriages would slide safely, and some of his stunts are still getting replicated to this day. So it was this idea that he was putting in all this invisible groundwork as much as the stunt, but he was putting in all of these safeguards in order to protect the people that were then performing. And it related for me to the rehearsing that I do with people in my community in order for my kids to access some pretty straightforward things. A really good example is my hairdresser. So my hairdresser not only had to cut the wig into my hairstyle, something she'd never done before. So I went for a sitting where I had my hair cut and then put the wig on, and she recut my hair, as it were. But we did another haircut where we were essentially rehearsing for my child to come and have their hair styled. So we documented it so that I could show my child what the space was like and what would happen. And then we discussed everything around what it would take for an appointment to take place. Like, it would need to be at the end of the day, what the music would be like, what the conversation should be like, the pronouns to use, the hairbrush that we'd bring from home, the fact that we wouldn't face a mirror, where should we sit, it couldn't be near the window, and all of these. And then what happens is that the haircut goes as if none of that's been done, because it runs smoothly. And so there's a lot of times in daily life where we do something seemingly easily, but actually to get there, there's been all of this preparation beforehand. And trying to maybe ask the audience to not, like, for us to not assume of others that something's easy just because it's easy for us. Like, you know, going to Sainsbury's is particularly tricky for our family is like for the kids to go into a space like that. So maybe other people are having that. So we move into a space where actually we're more understanding that anything could be challenging.
And I remember Googling Yakima Canute after you told me about him. He lived so long for someone said who's willing to fling themselves into other people's oblivion. But what I also liked about his story was that his name is not Yakima, and it's just a journalist who got his his name muddled up with the place name. So Yakima is just a name of a town or a village in Washington, and it's not his first name, but that's what he's now known as. And I just thought that was just a really weird, quite lovely connection to this play with words and use of language that you're interested to. I know that's completely separate, but I just thought that was kind of...
There is another very quick thing around that. So the only reason that he sort of moved towards directing was that he had flu when he was in the Navy, and he didn't have a voice that resonated well enough for when the movies turned into talkies. So when he realized that, so he'd been like performing in movies for a while and getting starring roles, but then couldn't carry that on when he was required to be able to talk for those roles. So this idea of like taking voice away and us speaking for other people and making assumptions and all of those things.
Exactly. It's so rich and so multi-layered and so perfectly connected to your narrative and the work in You and I. And another thing that I really loved about our sort of ongoing conversations alongside this sort of intense research was learning about your incredible range of interests and how you connect these to your life narrative, and involving your estranged dad or your friends or the books you've read. And there's something I wanted to pick up on is the fact that there's this quite I think it's black humor. It's kind of deadpan wit that I think is really interesting, and maybe some people miss in your show. And I just wanted to kind of draw attention to it here. I'm just going to read the section in my text that links to Natasha's discussion about Natasha and her estranged father. And I should say that every paragraph begins here with, in the text, begins with "if I," and that's a kind of way of creating a conversation about the conditional and fragility, but also repetition. So if I think about my estranged father, I think about the death club I set up after he died. He gave me a copy of his CV as a summary of his life. Along the top, he had written, and I quote, "Born 1941, married with 3 adult children, clean driving license," end quote. A year later, 2 friends died who had collaborated on a tattoo on my arm. They never met, but I spoke at length about death and life with both of them. And for this club, I wanted to create a space in which things could be said that often remain unsaid. Long before he was diagnosed with prostate and lung cancer, my father started a 531 club, which involved meeting in a pub immediately after work each day. It's likely that members of my club and his club would have had a lot to talk about. And I was just so taken with this kind of, I don't know, the humor and the pathos and the, obviously a lot of sadness. It was your estranged dad, but you bring this up. The question for you, was it conscious, this kind of deadpan humor that you kind of introduced to the work?
I'm not sure, but then humor's so connected, like with truth, isn't it? So we always say that there's like, there's so much truth in jest, and I think that there's humor, but it's about like the truth of the matter, and I had a very strange relationship with my dad. I didn't see him more than not even as many as 10 times after the age of 5, and they were much later in life. Once when he was ill and he got in touch with me, and I never rejected a connection, but I had this very strange series of events that happened around how I got to know him. And a lot of the information I have are from an obituary, so I have a very edited down version of him. I have some things that his second wife sent me as she was going through his belongings that would turn up intermittently after he died. I had the obituaries, and then I had this CV, which came from, I went down to meet him for the first time in his house, and he wanted to give me some things. And it was the most bizarre thing. It's 2 sheets of A4, and it's a genuine job CV. And by the time, like, I'm looking at it, the latest job he was going for was in 2008. And, you know, he'd left when I was 5. This was, so this, like, sentences along the top, yeah, really intrigued me. And then from that, I wanted to, like, just grapple with, like, dealing with death in quite a pragmatic way. So Death Club really was just about 8 women, and we all agreed to meet each month in my kitchen once a month, and we all came with, like, different reasons for being there. And it was really quickly obvious that actually in talking about death, you're really talking about living. And we were all middle-aged women, or round about that sort of midlife, you know, change, you know, where you're beginning. And so trying to think about what life, you know, life looks like for you in that moment was where that was at.
That's brilliant. I love that. I think it's, I mean, when you told me about it, I think that might have been the turning point where I thought I have to introduce all of your direct voice into this text, because the stories are quite nuts. Like, they just,
Yeah,
you know, go on and on. And I went through all of the emails that you'd sent me, and I thought, well, this is the text almost, you know, this is this story about your dad, clean driving license. I mean, I didn't laugh out loud, but, you know, I was just like,
it
what?
really dates it. It's like, I remember when we all used to, I mean, most
I
people in
know.
this audience won't remember writing a CV, whether you had to say that you had a driving license.
Actually, my students aged 20 write CVs, and it's very weird. I still just think this is, you know,
Yeah.
strange. Anyway, so it is still there, but clean driving license, I think, is very funny.
Yeah.
So I just want to move on now to talk a bit about your interest in collaboration. And obviously that's on display here with your invitation to me. But you work very closely with other artists, but also people around you, the wig maker, for instance, who's someone who lives locally to you. And I'm wondering if this is a kind of support structure as well as a vehicle to make your work.
Yeah, I really believe in like collaboration as an ongoing conversation that isn't necessarily always about trying to be directly on top of one another doing something together, that it sort of feeds both ways. And I think Louise, who's the wig maker in Mum Mum, was one of those moments where that's where the idea of the mother as stunt performer, with the mother being that being a character that I could inhabit, happened, because she was just another mum in the playground. We both had children that were struggling with school. We'd meet as we walked in and out of the school gates, and it was quite a long time before we spoke about what we did, like outside of childcare. And when she said that she was a wig maker, I was immediately struck by this alternative kind of coffee morning that we could have, because, you know, when kids go off to school the first time, everyone sort of says, oh, what are you going to do with all your time? It's like, yeah, anyway, so Mum Mum came from the idea of wanting to use the technique of wig making to talk about this labor, invisibility and repetition. And then it's like things come up as you need them. So I wanted to have a sound in the background, and I started with the idea of wanting a hum. I just wanted the sort of resonating sound that you put in your body in order to reassure somebody else of your presence and that you're there to, like, help them or regulate them. And Sophie, who's the singer in You and I and in Mum Mum, is a local friend, and we had been in contact a few years before around some other difficult things that were going on in life. And I knew she was a singer, but I knew she hadn't sung for a while because of life things that were happening. And I just asked her if she would consider like making some sounds, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted. And so that became a space for her to refine her voice. So I collaborate, but kind of like in a very organic way, just from the conversations I try and invest in having. And then there are some people that I then like have built an ongoing working relationship with. So I've been working with Oliver Sutherland now for a few years, and that's amazing to have such an amazing audiovisual support that can but now who also really knows my practice. So when we're doing projects, he spots things that he thinks might be useful, and then that helps the next thing that's coming behind that I don't know is there yet. And like even just through COVID, like making remote studio groups and just having a number of conversations that have no end. They're not built with a purpose of trying to get somewhere or get something. It's more just about being there for each other, which is also made a lot about how it is with the kids. About it, you know, people ask me about how I'm going to teach them for maths GCSE and how I'm going to do this, that and the other, and I'm like, I'm not. I'm going to support them and I'm going to love them, and when they're ready to do those big things that they want to do, we'll do that, and we'll just be really present on that journey. So
that's wonderful. And that also, I think it's incredibly important as an artist working outside of kind of, you know, a large city to create that kind of infrastructure, that support structure that feeds not just your practice but other people's practice. It's a lovely kind of composting process, I think.
Yeah.
And then in relation to the wigs, you talk a lot about the issues of or your interest in doubling and masking. That are techniques that are used by wig makers. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just felt that the wig was such a useful metaphor to talk about the labour that goes into masking. If you're trying to fit into a situation that actually is really uncomfortable or challenging, difficult, and so I know in this conversation we've talked a lot about my children, but it wasn't until I recognised similar traits that I'd had growing up to one of my children that actually it dawned on me that I was doing the same kind of labour and work, and I'm neurodivergent, and it has helped me make sense of new ways that I now go about working, so that I don't have to do as much of that really draining work that I was doing before. But with the wig, I love the fact as well that you're always seeing everything from behind. So and that in itself plays tricks on you. So the double I have in the film is played by Susan Lynch, who is a well-known actress who turned out to live only a short walk from my house when I was looking to find an actress, and knew the woods really well, so that was fantastic. But she was only available for one of the 2 days I had booked to film. So I then asked another friend from my Spike network, Rachel Clark, who's an amazing artist as well, and asked them to become a stand-in or double for the actress. So within the film, not only am I doubled, but the actress is doubled. And our eyes tell us that there's actually only one person. You have to look really closely. The only thing that changes is the shoes and slight body shape if you really look. But I really like how the wig and the use of the same clothes is enough to tell us that that's one thing, and that actually to kind of then therefore talk about the effort it takes to really see what is there, which is maybe also what we're asking when we're asking for people to make spaces more accommodating. for everybody, so that actually they're genuinely public spaces, because maybe at the moment a public space is actually quite limited.
Yeah, I was really interested in that idea of doubling, and when you told me that you had a stand-in for one of the people in the film, it took me a while to get my head round what I was listening to, but also how incredible it is that you don't really see what you're not told to see. Like, they do look quite different once you have that information that those two people aren't the same, or that there's a stand-in for another one of the people. That it's just like, of course that's the case, but you don't see it at all. So I think we're all of our, we're just constantly deluded and think we're seeing something that we're not. As I said at the beginning of the talk, one of the lovely things about our collaboration or conversation is the book recommendations and the podcast recommendations that have really, I mean, honestly, like for the last 6 months, I've read, sort of 5 or 6 books recommended by Natasha MacVoy, and it's been so, kind of fulfilling and kind of nourishing in many ways. And one of those books was Leslie Jameson's book of essays called The Empathy Exams, which probably lots of you know about. And there are many parallels, I think, with her writing process and your art making process, not just in terms of interest and subject matter, but also the use of the personal narrative. And I just want to read this section of my text that brings together Jameson's process, which is also both funny and sad. There's a lot of humor in it too, with your attempts to think through the bodies and minds of your children. So this is the last reading I'm going to do. If I question whether it is possible to imagine life in another body, I am reminded of Leslie Jameson's essay, The Empathy Exams. She takes a job as a medical actor who must feign symptoms while drawing on a backstory that provides motivation for her character. Appendicitis Angela has a dead guitarist uncle whose tour bus was hit by a tornado. They're very, very intricate stories that these that are written up for her to act in a medical situation for these trainee doctors. Through these constructed narratives and fragile speculative catastrophes, trainee doctors try to guess her maladies and learn the art of simulated empathy. Jameson's conclusion is that empathy is hard work, and I quote here, made of exertion, that dowdier cousin of impulse, end quote. I'm aware that, as Jameson points out, empathy is perched precariously between gift and invasion. But my attempts to think through your body, your mind, your approach to the world, are they working? And I just wondered, when I sent you that text, did you find it, because I find it quite weird reading it, did you find it quite uncomfortable or problematic or strange when I assumed your voice, especially when I'm talking about your children?
I found it very weird the first read through. Yeah, definitely. And luckily there was lots of time. We'd managed to schedule it, so there was lots of time, because I knew that I would need to read it and then go back to it a little while later, that it wasn't going to be able to just dive straight into that day and do it. I think that I love this paragraph. For me, this is sort of like the crux of it. And what's really lovely is that The Empathy Exams was a book that was suggested on Death Club by somebody else from my community.
Really? That's great.
And that person has now gone on to instigate in Dursley and Cam, which is the town that I live in. We have a thing called Holding Together in GL11, which is about trying to create a trauma-informed community. So I love how these, like, something happens in one place and then it ripples and something else happens somewhere else. So and this idea that empathy can be invasive, that it isn't always a positive thing, and to try and always be stepping back in a mindful way. And so I suppose when I read your text, it did feel intrusive, but I also wanted to leave enough of you in it that it wasn't me editing your words to be my words, because part of the reason I wanted you to write, but also for the text to be written in the first person in that way, is that in a lot of the conversations I've had with health or school groups that are trying to support our family, I've had to present our family history to them, and then they've rewritten that history to decide what we need to do next. So it was almost like doing that process to my practice of gathering together all of the evidence of the things I've been thinking about and working on, and then you were deciphering it into how it related to what was you were being presented with now to sit alongside. So there's like this life practice parallels that go on, happen because I have to live both lives like simultaneously. Like I'm at home at the moment, so that I can look after the kids, so that my husband, who would usually be here, can be in Birmingham looking at the show. So there's like, you know, there's just this sort of this management and voices.
That's so lovely, and it really links to what I said at the beginning about the desire to have a kind of more visceral or vulnerable connection between a sort of exhibition text and an artist's practice. And I remember I was in Athens when I wrote that text, and I pressed send, and I was just like, oh my God, you're gonna hate it. It's just, you know, I read it to my partner, and I was like, do you think I can actually send this to her? Like, do you think this is okay? So, and I like that. I like the fact that I wasn't just kind of standing behind a screen saying, this is what I think about your practice, the exhibition. You know, there's a sort of sense of vulnerability or a kind of roughness about it.
I definitely had Deborah Levy vibes of you being like in some hot country writing a text. And she just released that August Blue, which was all about doubles. I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Oh, that's so
Sent my double over to Athens
I'm totally here for that vibe. That's excellent. I would love to have it again. Yeah. I'm aware of time, so I am just going to go on to talking about the role of how important it is. And I think it might sound a bit dull, but I think it's super important for exhibition making, about the process that you went through to consider how to put the exhibition together, and think about the response of the viewer, and think about the length of the film, about the sound, about the darkness. And if you just say quite briefly the thinking behind that.
So in my work, I'm really interested in things being quite as comfortable as I can make them for the viewer. So both films are 5 minutes and 5.5 minutes. On the big film, you have that music that you heard at the beginning, and then the vocal sound comes in only for one section. So it's almost like a time signature, because you can get kind of lost following the figures and not be sure where you've got to. And also I wanted the objects in the space to tell you about the layout of the space. So you have the vinyls to reflect the film, so that you almost immediately have a sort of sense of what's in the space. But specifically talking to Eastside about, could the exhibition be responsive? So access afternoons are amazing and we should all be doing them, but actually if somebody can only turn up when it's not one of those, and it is possible actually to put a light on or to lower the volume or turn the volume up, for those to be feasible things that we could do within the space. And so I was really interested in the exhibition being able to respond to the viewer, rather than always expecting the viewer to have to adapt to the space.
I think it's something that lots of arts organisations are beginning to think about, but I just think, you know, we need to do it a little bit faster. And then I think my penultimate, maybe it's my final question, I can't remember, but I just wanted to talk briefly about the role that language and reading have in both of our practices, and the fact that you so often have this dialogue with other artists, Harriet Bowman and Sean Edwards and Anna Barham, about this interest in language. And I just had a lovely chat with Anna, who I know went to see your exhibition, and she wrote me this gorgeous email, and I just had to read a little bit about in response to your exhibition. the shift of, and I'm reading her email here, the shift of subject position is one of the things I found so compelling about it. In the making of the work, in the image itself, in terms of the double, the actor playing Natasha, the stunt double, the position of the camera, Natasha and the twins, and the subject position of the viewer, and how the work explores different qualities of attention and I can't even say
I can't say it
either. Between all those moving parts. I think it's an important part of your practice to have, as I said, the sort of conversation with other artists and responding to your work. And I know it was important that Anna came up to Birmingham to see that. So I just thought it was nice to kind of read out her response to it.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away that Anna made the effort to come up. I'm really grateful. I'm always grateful to anybody that makes an effort to get to an exhibition and to see it in person. But those conversations, so like Harriet and I have an ongoing conversation, and those are spaces where you can really go deep into what your practice is trying to get to. It's a safe place to edit, maybe, I think is what it is.
Yeah,
I do want to actually not hide behind lots of layers of like excessive information, and actually try and get it down to something that succinctly comes together, but then unfolds. Like it does that thing.
That's gorgeous. That's such a lovely way of looking at it. A safe space to edit. I love that. I'm aware of time. We've got 10 minutes, but I just wanted to finish on, because we've had this whole lovely dialogue about book recommendations. I was wondering if anyone in the audience had any really interesting book recommendations. They don't have to be connected to any of the subjects we've been talking about, but we just love a good book recommendation. And my current one, my big love in at the moment, is this book called Dark Neighborhoods by Vanessa Onwemezi. It was written 2 years ago, and there is a connection with your work, Natasha, in that there's a huge kind of focus on language and the way that words are positioned on the page. Ruth just put it in the chat. Thanks, Ruth. Yeah. It's a book of short stories, and they're incredibly hard to locate in terms of a kind of era or a time frame or a geographic location. But they're kind of strange and foreboding. There's a sense of a slight sort of dystopic future involved, but she uses really precise language and gaps. I won't go through here, but there's sort of, it's almost like poetry, some of it. And she puts shifts between words and sentences, and there's a lot of kind of offbeat formatting. And the way she talks about loss and community and alienation, that makes it sound super depressing. It really isn't. It's like totally life affirming and incredible. But I just wanted to kind of draw everyone's attention to this amazing writer. She also works a lot with artists. I've actually commissioned her a couple of years ago to write a text for my archive of destruction, so I'm actually completely biased, but yeah, that's my book recommendation. Natasha MacVoy, what is yours?
Well, I am currently reading or listening to an audiobook, because that's sometimes a good way of doing two things at once. Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which is incredible and terrifying. And in it, she talks about the digital double that we're all creating, and how that is making us quite two-dimensional and flattening, when we actually, as humans, need to be able to be in spaces to evolve and connect and have those difficult conversations, and grow compassion and empathy. So yeah, that's my recommendation at the moment.
That's brilliant. That's on my list. When you mentioned it before, I was like, yep, that's definitely. I heard her do an interview about it the other day, and it just sounds absolutely incredibly prescient. Okay, so we have sort of 4 or 5 minutes. If there's any questions or anything, I can't see the chat box down here. Is that because I don't have access to it, Ruth?
You should have, but I can read. Do you want me to just read them out? Is that a simple way to?
Yeah. Okay,
so we've got about 4 questions. We have Camino Walton asked, in relation to the ripples Tasha's mentioned, what are the ripples that have been made in your own writing as part of this collaboration, Jes?
Oh, that's such a nice question. I think the ripples go back to what I said about vulnerability and a sort of increased desire. And this comes out of the exhibition that I did at Milton Keynes Gallery about sculpture and the body, and a kind of contemporary sense of a kind of vulnerability in the way that we all relate to each other, not just as human bodies, but animal bodies and the planet. And I think working with Tash has kind of introduced a kind of new level of vulnerability, and I think it's kind of given me a taste to want to do more, like to be slightly more risky in what I do, um, and sort of think that maybe in 10-20 years time I want to look back on what I've written as something that is exploratory rather than definitive.
Mm.
Great, thank you. I mean, this next question also kind of connects to that in some ways. So it's from Sonia Levesque. Creating art that's so closely connected to you and your life seems so vulnerable, which makes for wonderful work. But I wonder, do you ever feel or worry about being overly exposed, or is being able to control the narrative and create the message around your life and art empowering? That's one for you, Natasha.
Well, that's a good question. I think the act of making art's vulnerable in any way that you make art. To be honest, I think it's a vulnerable pursuit to take on, and I think I have pursued a personal narrative because it takes up so much of my space. So a lot of the research that I've had to do has been around supporting my family and myself, and that has eclipsed what might be considered like time that you could research something a little bit more distanced. And the empowering bit is realizing the changes that have shifted in my community because of it. So I can have different conversations with those people that have been involved in my work because we know each other in a completely different way, and that we've each taken that into our lives, and I find that a really good reason to keep doing it.
Yes. So more questions. Eva Young asks, it's such a rich and insightful dialogue. Thank you both. I'm very interested in what Natasha said, where you said empathy can be invasive. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, please?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful if we go into empathy with an intent to change things, because that will make us feel better, that will make us feel like we've done something good, or that we've made a positive change, and the importance of just listening and being quiet, of like actually being present. And like presence is a gift, like to give somebody our presence and to be really attentive is closer maybe to what I feel empathy should be about actually trying to really understand what has happened for that person, not to go in and fix it, which I think we're conditioned to think of ourselves as fixers and make everything okay. And sometimes we have to sit with people as they struggle with difficult things.
Yeah, great. And then we've got another question from Alice Valentine Dykes, who asks, do you discuss with your children the question of the time capsule you're creating for them? What's their response, and how important is their interest in it?
They know what I do, and I did show the film to one of my children who is a very good editor. They've taught themselves to use DaVinci Resolve much better than me, just using YouTube. And they had some really good feedback about the fact that they felt I should include some natural sounds in it, which was great. And I think that the time capsule I'm creating isn't one they're interested in at the moment, but I'm aware of it being a record, in the same way that after my father died, what I have that represents him are these funny things that came together almost like a time capsule. It's a really good description. and that maybe that it show, and it's a time capsule of that place in the woods as well. Like, I mean, with the state of the world, if those woods were to dramatically change, it's a time capsule of all of that. And I quite like how it's not very authoritarian. I'm not sitting there telling them what I think. It's just a record of me walking like I did with them. That's it.
Thanks so much for all your book recommendations. This is a dream. I never thought you'd actually do it. This is brilliant. Look, can you see, Tash? We've got.
Oh, excellent.
It, can't you?
Yeah, you have to copy all of these.
Yeah, definitely. That's fantastic. We are exactly on time. Look at that. It's 2:00. Can I just thank Natasha just hugely for all of your generosity and thoughtfulness and all the incredible work that you've done in the last 6 months, but also beyond that. But yeah, it's been such a rich collaboration, and I'm hoping that it will continue in some way as we've been talking about.
I'd love that. Thank you. Thanks everyone that's been involved in bringing this show to the world and helping me along the way. Thank you.
I just want to say, Natasha asked earlier on if said she'd be happy to share her email. So I'm just putting that in the chat for anyone that has any questions that they didn't really feel like they'd got into a form or wanted to share in this kind of context, or just do want to kind of carry on the conversation beyond this. So yeah, I'd just like to say thanks very much to both of you. That's been a very excellent way to spend an hour.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, really interesting conversation, and yeah, thanks to everyone for coming. Just in terms of things we've got coming up, Natasha's show is on alongside Sajan Kuna's exhibition here until the 16th of December. We're open Wednesday to Saturday, 12 till 5. So do come and look, because with both of them, I think you need to experience them in real life. They're both very physical shows, really, that your body needs to be in. And then Sajan Kuna and Anthony Acchiavetti will be in conversation on the 30th of November, 6 to 8 p.m. That'll be a really interesting conversation around a lot of the ideas that kind of underpin Sajan's show. So everything from Punjabi villages and their kind of history in terms of the social colonization, the past, the future, the present. Big sprawling conversation with Anthony, who's a professor at Yale, associate professor at Yale. And then also we're hosting a langar. So on the 7th of December, there'll be a meal in the gallery, again, around Sajan's show, where Sajan and a number of other people will be kind of hosting a conversation about that exhibition too. So yeah, do come see the shows, come to the events. Yeah, hope to see you soon. Thanks very much, you two.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.